We're here this morning to listen to a very informative and excellent presentation by a foremost authority on drone laws and regulations in the United States. She's a former policy crafter for the Obama administration and is now a private attorney in DC, specializing in UAV operations. Please help me welcome Lisa Ellman.
Thank you so much, TJ, and good morning, National Association of Broadcasters Conference. Good morning, Las Vegas. I am so impressed that you're all here at 9:15 in the morning on the third day of the conference. But thank you all for being here. It's so great to be here. My goal today is just to give a brief overview of the legal, policy, and regulatory framework that governs the use of drones in our country. And then I want to leave plenty of time to have questions at the end, and I'm happy to remain afterwards as well to answer any questions that you may have. So a little bit about my background, in addition to what TJ just said. I recently left the federal government. I worked for President Obama for several years, and recently, in my most recent appointment, I worked in several jobs in the White House and the Department of Justice, and my focus was on policy regarding new innovations, emerging technologies, and most recently, I ran the policymaking process at the Department of Justice focused on the domestic use of drones. And so it's only fairly recently that the federal government as a whole has started to pay attention to all of these issues, but they're definitely paying attention loud and clear. As you can see, we're in the middle of drones fever in our country. And just the fact that we're all here at this magnificent and spectacular drones pavilion here at the NAB show is an amazing thing. Drones were the Christmas gift of choice this year. I know I received two. For my fiance, very romantic gift. I loved it, but they were the Consumer Electronics Association has suggested that sales this year will top $100 million for drones. So we're really hobbyists, law enforcement agencies, and public agencies, as well as commercial uses, are really limited only by our imagination, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that right now. So let's take a step back. And when I first came to the policymaking process and sitting kind of in the meetings that we were having in the federal government, what do the American people understand drones to be? The confusing thing is that a drone can actually refer to a toy, a model aircraft that kids fly in the park, that we all fly, a tool of industry, and even a tool of war, as we hear about lots of the news. So the same word actually can mean any of these very different things. A toy and a predator or a reaper that we fly overseas have pretty much nothing in common, but they have the same name. And so there's a lot of confusion out there in the American public about what a drone is and what drones' capabilities are, and that has kind of had an impact on the policymaking process. So as I mentioned, my work is focused only on drones being flown here in the United States, not overseas. And we split, so as a policymaking or regulatory matter, the government divides the use of drones into three different areas. The first is hobbyist or recreational use. The second is public use, the government use, for example. And then the third is commercial use. And I want to talk to you mostly about commercial use today, but just for point of comparison, give you a snapshot of what the policies are for the other uses of drones as well. So hobbyist use of drones has been broadly authorized in our country for years. For decades, we've been able to go fly model airplanes in the park, and as long as we're not recklessly endangering the public. So what the law says is, if you follow the guidelines for permitted model aircraft flights, you can do what you want, so long as your sole intention is to fly your drone for fun. And it's an intent-based test. So the question here, because there's a fine line between a commercial flight and a recreational flight, and there's a lot of confusion about that in the public. So it's an intent-based test. So the question is, if I take my drone and go to a local park and take lots of photos, and they're great photos, and I want to put those photos up on Facebook, that is totally fine. Share with my friends, share with my family. If I decide that I want to sell those photos for $10 a piece because they're particularly great photos, all of a sudden that is a commercial flight and not authorized yet here in this country. And so that would be illegal. It's the exact same flight doing the exact same things, but because it's an intent-based test, it's therefore not authorized. And the background here is that aviation law is kind of separated by commercial versus recreational flights. That's how it's designed, that's how it's organized. And so that explains why the intent-based test is how the UAS world is right now currently organized, even though it doesn't make a lot of sense in practice sometimes. So just to go through the quick, so as long as the intent-based test, you're flying strictly for hobby or recreational use, you're operating in accordance with a community-based set of guidelines, your drone is less than 55 pounds, you're operating within visual line of sight, you're under 400 feet. And visual line of sight means I can actually see it with my eyes. And most importantly, you're operating in a way that does not interfere with or gives way to manned aircraft. You're not recklessly endangering the public in any way, and that is key. And if you're within 5 miles of an airport, you also have to coordinate with them. But otherwise, you can go and do what you want as a hobbyist. Public agencies, federal, state, and local public agencies can't wait and are using drones now. And their use is broadly authorized as well with the FAA. So the background here is public agencies want to be able to use it for a lot of the same reasons that commercial entities can't wait to be able to use drones. Public agencies want to be able to take advantage of their significant benefits as well. So to find missing hikers, to help with enhancing officer safety in law enforcement situations. Public agencies across the country are already using drones for safety. It's obviously a lot safer to use a drone than a helicopter, for example, in certain situations. And then commercial applications. So Congress mandated in 2012 that the federal government integrate drones into our national airspace by 2015. That process has started. This was around the time when I was asked to go work on drones policy in the federal government. The whole of federal government was paying attention. The FAA has recently released on February 15th of this year, we had an exciting development. We saw a proposed rule come out of the FAA focused on the safety and operational issues with regard to drones. The rule was broadly, generally very applauded by the industry. It's very pro-innovation, and it was a great first step. And I'll talk more about what the proposed rule says in a moment. But the key is actually right now, nothing has changed in the short term. It's still not authorized yet. We don't have any final rule in place that authorizes commercial use of drones in our country. But the demand is there, as we see here, for film production and TV production and journalism here at National Association of Broadcasters, and we see across the country. So filmmakers can't wait to be able to use drones. Some folks are here involved with film production. Package delivery, as we've heard from Amazon. Very excited to deliver packages with drones. Precision agriculture, drones enhance crop dusting efforts over thousands of acres, and plant inspection, where to increase the efficiencies involved with farming. Industrial applications, such as flare stack inspection, pipeline inspection, cell tower inspection, and delivery of medicine to rural locations in other areas. So the potential uses for drones in our country is truly limited only by our imagination. The federal government is well aware of that, and they're working quickly. They're looking to other countries who have, they're a bit ahead of us in this regard. For example, Domino's has actually delivered a drone using a pizza. Delivered a pizza using a drone. That would be really cool. Delivered a pizza using a drone. In England. Japan, 85% of crop dusting in Japan is already done with drones. In Australia, New Zealand, Japan, it's broadly authorized. In Canada, for example, it's already authorized to use drones for commercial purposes. And so the United States is catching up. We have the most complex air system in the world, and what the federal government is most concerned about is safety as well as privacy, which I'll talk about as well. But the safety concerns are prime concern, and the federal government is working hard on that now. So I mentioned that the FAA just recently released its notice of proposed rulemaking. And let me just take a step back and give you a sense. If you're the FAA, what are you worried about? You've been mandated, you've been told that you need to integrate drones into our national airspace. What does that actually mean? Are there highways in the sky for drones to fly? How do they interact with manned aircraft? What about kind of low-flying crop dusting airplanes? What about people and structures on the ground? So the FAA is thinking about all of these things, and it has quite a task ahead of it. And some of the issues here are, can we trust drones not to fall out of the sky? And if the technology is such that we don't know whether they're going to fall out of the sky, then we need to regulate according to kind of that idea, but recognize that as the technology moves forward, the rulemaking is going to move forward. And this first iteration of the proposed rule is just the first iteration. We're going to see many other iterations over the next several years, so this is really just the start. So February 15th, the rule was proposed. On February 23rd, the notice of proposed rulemaking is open for comment. That means all of us here in this room should right now be thinking about what we would want to say to the FAA about what we think the policy should be, what the demand is, what the technology looks like. The FAA wants to hear from all of you right now, and I think it's really important for all of us to consider submitting comments in connection with the NPRM. And we have until April 24th to do that, so it's all happening right now. And, excuse me, the rule was proposed February 15th. It takes just through the rulemaking process, it takes a long time to go through the whole interagency process. The FAA is going to be responding to every one of the comments that is submitted, and so at least for the next year and a half or 2 years, we're not going to have any final rule in place. And in the meantime, you have to ask the FAA for specific authorization to be able to fly a drone, and that's what's known as the Section 333 exemption, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. So here's a snapshot of what the proposed rule looks like. The great news for folks who follow this closely for the industry is one of the big kind of hiccups with the 333 exemption process for industry has been a requirement that the operator of a commercial drone have a private pilot's license. And they have since downgraded that requirement to include recreational and sports pilot licenses, but that's still, you have to be licensed to fly a manned aircraft. And that's been a setback for some folks who don't have someone on staff who's already a licensed pilot. The rule, once it's final in a few years, will allow for a UAS operator certificate where anyone can go take a knowledge test and get certified to be an operator. And it's very low cost. It'll be very accessible to all of us throughout the country. It's kind of like going and taking a test to be able to get a driver's license type thing. You study for the test, and it's a very exciting development, partly because the skills that are necessary to fly a manned aircraft and the skills that are necessary to fly a drone are very different. Someone who is a great video game player is probably better at flying a drone. The pilot of a manned aircraft understands airspace, and that's important for us all to learn. But there are different sets of considerations in each case. So this is more appropriately suited to the operator of a drone. So that's good news. It'll still be the small UAS will be less than 55 pounds. Maintaining visual line of sight. So this is something where folks in the industry have had a little heartache because ideally folks would like to be able to fly beyond line of sight. A lot of the efficiencies with drones come because, for example, in the precision agriculture context, if I want to be inspecting thousands of acres of crops, it gets rid of all the efficiency benefits if I have to actually, follow my drone the whole way. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So beyond line of sight, as the technology improves, will become possible. Once the proposed rule becomes final, it will also be possible to get an exemption from Section 107, which is going to be the new set of regulations, where you can tell the FAA how you're going to operate with an equivalent level of safety, kind of like we're doing now with the Section 333 exemption. It's the same idea. You can always ask for an exemption from that rule. We have 100 more feet to fly, so 500 feet up, 100 miles an hour. Important in the news and broadcasting industry, one of the biggest constraints is flying away from people. So like I mentioned in the beginning, that the federal government is considering that where the technology is these days with drones, that they still will fall out of the sky once in a while. And we all know that no matter how responsible our use is, they do crash once in a while. And so that explains the flown away from people requirement. Over time, again, I see this will be an iterative process, and as the technology improves, the policy making will move forward as well. And the airspace restrictions, just similar to what we described before with hobbyists, you'll have to fly away from airports and away from restricted areas. Now, comments to the FAA, like I mentioned, are due in the next week or two. The FAA is wanting comments on a few specific questions. They want your thoughts. And the first relates to, and there's several of them, I just kind of chose a few that would interest all of us in particular. But are there well-defined circumstances under which beyond line of sight operations would pose little or no risk? And if so, what are those situations? And what technologies would have to be included? For example, do we need collision avoidance software? What kind of technologies or what kind of software is out there that can help our drones become smarter, intelligent, find its way home, for example, if it flies away? The other big issue that interests all of us, especially in the news broadcast and journalism industry, is the micro UAS. So Canada, right now, with its regulations, it has a tiered approach. So if you have a drone that's 4.4 pounds or less, you have a general broad authorization to fly anywhere in the country with very limited restraints. 4.4 pounds or higher, up to 55 or so, you have more paperwork, you have to file more protections. The same question is being asked, should that be the case in our country? Should we regulate based on weight? If I want to fly a drone that's 4 pounds or less, does that present such little risk to a manned aircraft or to people on the ground that I should just have a broad exemption to be able to fly and do whatever I want across the country? And if so, how come? And the FAA is looking to hear from us on that question. So, like I mentioned, that right now with the NPRM, we have at least 2 years that we're still waiting until we have a final rule. So in the meantime, it's important to get approval from the FAA in order to be able to fly. So essentially, Section 333 of the law authorizes the FAA to permit low-risk commercial operations in order to encourage across our country the use of drones in areas where they provide significant benefits but don't have a large amount of risk to the American people. The idea here is that a drone is considered an aircraft and under the law. And because of that, any aircraft that's being flown needs to abide by the federal aviation regulations. The federal aviation regulations are a bunch of kind of protections or requirements on the flight of a manned aircraft. One example of that would be you always have to have a manual on board the aircraft. That makes no sense as applied to drones, right? How would you have a manual on board a drone? So you say to the FAA, I understand that I'm supposed to abide by the federal aviation regulations. But some of these don't make sense as applied to drones. Here's how it doesn't make sense as applied to my operation. And here's how I'm going to operate my drone, my aircraft, with an equivalent level of safety as if I was abiding by the federal aviation regulations. And there are many industries who've been very interested in seeking these exemptions, and the floodgates have opened. Last I checked, there are almost 1,000 applications that have been filed. As of a week or two ago, 128 petitions have been approved, but that includes, in the last few weeks, they've really streamlined the process to move it up, and they're going to be issuing summary grants of approval, specifically for film and TV production, and anything involving aerial data collection, which is great news for all of us here at the NAB show. Filmmakers were the first to get permission from the FAA to be able to operate in an approved way. Industrial applications, precision agriculture, photography, aerial survey, more have been approved, and a lot more approvals are on the way. So just a little bit about if you're a commercial operator and you're interested in pursuing a 333, here's what the FAA is looking for. So a film set was the perfect kind of first example of a setting where it made sense to authorize commercial operations here in the United States. Because everyone on that film set has opted in, they've signed a waiver, they're all members of creating this film. They're all what the FAA would consider participants in the operation. So if the drone were to fall out of the sky, it's going to fall on someone who's a participant in that operation, and that's fine, or not fine, but that's not what they're worried about is non-participants flown over crowds of people, and that's of course what we wanted to be able to do with the news industry. So the FAA is working with entities in the news industry on basically certifying, making sure if you're going to be flying over crowds of people, we at least have to make sure that the aircraft is safe. And so those are some of the conversations that are happening now, and I think that this is all really good development for our industry. Some of the restrictions in the exemption, again, it would include flying away from persons or property within visual line of sight, small UAS, and using a spotter as well. If you're applying for a 333, you should tell the FAA who you are, why it's in the public's interest. For example, it's going to be a lot safer to operate a drone than a helicopter, based on what you're doing. How you will be operating under equivalent level of safety. You essentially have the petition, and then you also submit a manufacturer's manual and an operations manual. You tell the FAA exactly how this is going to work, which drone it is, which make and model it is, and provide the manuals, and also talk about how you're going to be operating it. And that's a pretty detailed, cumbersome process. That's something that my law firm, I'm now in the private sector, and I lead a drones practice group at a big law firm. And we have filed or have in process more than 70 petitions for exemption at this point. So we're helping our clients get 333 approval to be able to fly. And it's kind of gotten down to a science in terms of knowing exactly which federal aviation regulations you're asking for approval on, depending on what the operation is. But you're describing your vehicle, you're describing how you're going to be operating, so that if it's not you operating, your employees know exactly how it works. You describe your use, and then and one of the big things here, like I said, is, and again, how it's in the public interest. Now, there have been many updates over the last few weeks that have been very well received, and the FAA is working really hard. We're getting some of our exemption approvals are coming literally at midnight at night. I mean, FAA folks are working incredibly hard to get through the pile of applications that are on their desk. They've adopted a summary grant approval process to speed up the approvals, and they have mentioned that film and TV production specifically fall in that category. So aerial data collection, as opposed to, for example, providing wireless service on a drone, or crop dusting, or doing something else with the drone package delivery. Aerial data collection falls under this umbrella, and film and TV production will be handled through the summary grant process. So that means that the FAA will be looking, are there similar petitions that have been approved in the past, and if so, they'll rush it through the process. The other set of good news, which I mentioned, that it's just a recreational or sport pilot license required instead of the full private pilot's license. That's an improvement. It's still a manned aircraft pilot's license. But the additional good news with that change in requirements is that no medical certificate is required anymore. With a private pilot's license, you have a Class 3 medical certificate, and you need now only a valid driver's license, which is what you need for the sports pilot's license. So that's also good news. That serves as your medical certificate, essentially saying that you can be able to see. And then once you have your 333 exemption, then what? A lot of people don't. So you don't have actually blanketed you can't just fly anywhere. You still have to abide by the terms of your exemption, and you also have to. How it worked in the past, it was fairly bureaucratic. You had to let the FAA know, get a certificate of authorization to fly at that particular time. So a few days before I was going to fly, I would have to send a note over to the FAA asking for approval. It's a 2-page COA, certificate of authorization form. And that has actually, the FAA has stepped back from that requirement in the last few weeks and no longer requires that. You have a blanket exemption to be able to fly anywhere in the country once you have your 333. Anywhere up to 200 feet and away from restricted airspace with some of the similar protections, but that is a really big step and something that's been very well received by the industry. You only have to provide notice to airmen. You have to provide notice that you're going to be flying just to let airliners and airports know in the area that you're going to be flying, but you don't have to ask anyone for approval. So that was resulting in a significant delay for folks. The FAA realized that, and they've since changed the requirement. So those are some of the recent updates to the 333 process. I'm happy to take any any questions. But first, let me just get to the final big policy issue, which the American public has been very concerned about. So while the FAA focuses on safety, a lot of what the federal government has been hearing from the American people have been privacy concerns associated with the use of drones in our country. Does anyone here watch Modern Family at all? Okay. So a few weeks ago, you may have seen this episode, there was an episode of Modern Family where the family was sunbathing in their backyard, and a drone, so they didn't know whose it was, a drone came hovering over their backyard while they were sunbathing. The husband got a net, tried to swat the drone away, tried to get the drone to fly away, and his swimming trunks fell down. He fell into the pool, and the next day the drone zoomed away. And the next day that video showed up on YouTube, and the title was Drone 1, Idiot Nothing. And this whole episode was about these privacy concerns related to the use of drones. In towns and communities across America, safety is of utmost concern. But the American people have really been fixated on a lot of these privacy concerns. We've seen 43 states that have either proposed legislation or passed legislation that would limit the use of drones in the United States. And that was at last count, it could be more now. And they do so in the name of privacy. The FAA has jurisdiction nationally over the safety and security of the national airspace, but privacy has typically been regulated at the state level. And so, because of that, the federal government recognized that it also had to consider privacy issues. And on the same day that the NPRM was issued, governing the safety and operational uses of drones, the White House released a presidential memorandum, and this was a memorandum that I worked a lot on when I was in government. It governs transparency, privacy, and accountability issues related to the federal government's own use of drones. And it also sets up a multi-stakeholder process that will be run through the Department of Commerce to craft voluntary best practices for commercial industry in how we're going to be operating drones commercially here in our country that relate to privacy and transparency and accountability. That process is about to get kicked off. The Department of Commerce is actually accepting thoughts and comments right now from the public on what this process should look like. And the idea is to build consumer trust and build public trust for the use of drones so that we can incorporate and integrate drones into our society, into our everyday life, in a way that wins the trust as well of the American people. It's critical to the success of the industry. So here's a few of the issues that will be talked about: data collection, notice to the public, and protocols, and how companies are going to be monitoring their employees' use of drones. So that's a snapshot of where we're at. That process will kick off in May, and it will likely last a year or so, and then we'll have this set of voluntary best practices. As with all of this, it's all iterative. It's all going to be developed over time, and right now is a great time to get involved. It's very interesting because I was working on these issues for the federal government, and now being on the private sector side and working with industry and being a part of this industry, I've seen both sides. And I think really to bring about the success of this industry, we really need policymakers and innovators to work together. And this is something that I talk a lot about. My word for this is polivation, policy making that promotes innovation. And I encourage this on the federal government side, but I also would encourage all of us to be involved in the policymaking process and as well find champions in the government that will support what we're looking to do and will understand where we're coming from. We know the technology, we know the use cases, we know all this stuff and are experts in a way that the federal government is not. So it's critical that all of our voices are heard as well. So with that, I want to just, I'll just put up my contact info. I'm happy to talk to anyone offline, but want to make sure that there's a few minutes for questions as well. Yeah.
I don't know what to tell them. Hobbyists, using the 333 exemption.
That's a 333. I have 35 university clients across the country, including University of California, that are seeking. We're getting 333 exemptions for all of them.
the students get there or what school?
The school.
And then how do the kids get there?
There needs to be, because of the pilot license requirement, there needs to be someone that's there operating with the students. So you need, let me give you my contact info. But so someone needs to be actually controlling the aircraft, so you can have the students right there and teaching them what's going on.
By professional.
Yes. And you can also get permission to educate students. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Sorry guys, we are all in line here for the
Yeah.
questions.
So one of the things with universities, anyone who cares about universities, one of the universities, there's been a lot of these rules don't make sense in a lot of ways. Universities is one of a great example of that. Essentially, the line is drawn between recreational and non-recreational use. A university is a non-recreational use. So unless it falls into the public category, which is a public university or even a private university that's contracted with a public agency operating for a core governmental function that has been very narrowly defined to be aeronautical research, it has to be a 333. You're treated like a commercial operator.
So my question is, obviously this is a long process, 2 years. I have several friends, like about 25, that are flying commercially. Some have applied for Section 3 exemptions. I'm one of those people. Is the FAA kind of taking just into account that they have an enforcement? I mean, what are they doing in the enforcement? Because obviously, if we're all working towards best practices and adhering to the new rules as they are developed.
So the FAA has just issued guidance on enforcement with local and state law enforcement. So there's two different things here. The first is the line between recreational and commercial. If you're a commercial operator operating in a way that you're not allowed to be because you don't have approval. And then there's the second issue, whether you're hobbyist or commercial, operating in a way that would recklessly endanger the public. The first kind of most important, I think, kind of group of that is the recklessly endangering the public. If someone complains to the FAA that my competitor is operating commercially without any approvals, the FAA will likely look into it, and if all the evidence is there, if you're posting videos, you have a website. I mean, I have people contact me saying, I need to get approval, and their website indicates they've been in business for a long time. They've been doing this for a long time. And so, the worst that would happen in that case is the FAA would issue a cease and desist letter. But the worst part of that is if something goes wrong. If you're operating without approval, something happens, and it falls out of the sky and hurts someone, you'll have huge liability. And that's not, and the FAA is going to be a partner for years and years to come in this industry, and so it doesn't make any sense to alienate users in that way. So I'm a lawyer, of course I would say don't operate without permission, but it's also where it's not that hard to file a 333, and they're really working to get through as many of those quickly now. I think it makes a lot of sense to cover yourself in this industry.
But they're not moving towards making an exception to recreational pilot at this point in time.
They're recreational. If the spirit of the flight is commercial, then it's a commercial flight. There are businesses that are saying we just don't charge for this flight. Well, that if you're a business, you're operating for profit. Even if you're a nonprofit, even if you're a university, you're operating in a way that's not recreational. You're still commercial. So that's just how the line has been drawn. Policymakers recognize it doesn't make a lot of sense. It's a statutory thing. It's a congressional mandate. The FAA does not, like the private pilot's license, the reason that exists is because Congress has included that in the law. The FAA doesn't have the jurisdiction to waive that requirement. It wishes it did, frankly. And that's something that Congress is looking at right now, and maybe we'll see movement on that in the next few months.
Quick. I'm a news director. I'm working with a chopper company that's got a Section 333 exemption.
Great.
We got the paperwork done. It's hypothetical.
Oh, you're not? I was like, congratulations.
No,
Right, okay.
Fire breaks out in a national park. I can just send the drone as long as I'm not flying over people and following all the other rules.
So the key is 200 feet, and then you have to be 500 feet from you.
It's the previous rules were approved airspace before. You had to get approval for a specific airspace.
Right, now you're geographically unlimited. The 333 is geographically
You're
unlimited.
unlimited.
You can be anywhere in the United States.
As long as you follow.
Yes.
Even
exactly.
if it's federal
I'll give you
space.
I don't know if you guys can all take this.
Right.
Give my contact info.
Here I
Right.
am, I'm standing before you, a commercial multi-engine instrument, commercial helicopter pilot. I am in the production business. I want to get a 333. What do I do now?
Yep, sure, I can help you with that. I'm happy to hear.
I have another question
Yeah,
for you.
do you have a card?
Have they considered ESP
What's up?
transponder installation on these drones?
Yeah, I mean that's so. Right now, some drones don't even have any GPS, so that's something that transponders. In terms of when you're like the idea is over the next several years that to have some smart drones be as smart as possible. The software becomes really important. But with you, do you have a vehicle in
Ladies and
mind that you want to
gentlemen,
fly?
we'll be starting the next session in about 3 minutes. Next session is brought to you by Aerodata, showing their aerodynamism solutions, including live flight demos and live video feeds.
Seeing the quality of the camera. So we have to lift it reasonably. The weights you're talking about a machine that's going to be
As long as it's under 55, you're fine. Yeah. But with the transponder, with whatever, you just have to describe your vehicle. You have the 333 exemption is attached to your use cases and to your vehicle and to you as a legal entity to your business.
Can your firm provide all of these services?
Yes.
Okay. If you guys tell me, I'm interested, approximately how much does it cost?
It depends on how much you have done on your end. So it can be anywhere from a lot of the work comes into drafting the manual. So if you're buying from a company that gives you the manual, the manufacturer's manual, ideally you might want to, and I can send you. I have a whole list of all of the vehicles that have already been approved. If you find a vehicle that's already been approved, you don't really have to worry about that. You take their manufacturer's manual. Then it's important just to have the operator's manual, and that's something that you would draft on your own about how your company is going to be operating this manual. It's proprietary. It's not something that you can just, and we can either draft that for you or you can draft that yourself. But if you draft that yourself, that's how you keep the cost down. So it would range anywhere from, depending on the complexity, it could be anywhere from $7,000 to $20,000. But that includes everything and all the following as well.
Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. Good to meet you, Phil.
So they're demoing a craft that can handle a 250-pound payload. Will these weights ever become legal down the road?
Yeah, so, and I very quickly mentioned this. So anything that does not fall within kind of the rules. So right now on the weight limit with the 333 exemptions, those are going to be slower to get approved. When the rule becomes final, if you want to fly something that's heavy, you're going to basically ask for an exemption from the weight requirement, and you're going to have to prove that your technology is safe. But it would be a similar process to what everyone's going through now. Just one.
And then one other thing. So some of these new drones have like technology where you're programming the movement of it automatically. So where's the liability fall if, say, the software fails versus the
Yeah, that's it's a very important question. That's something that's going to be, I mean, there are a lot of insurance companies that they're getting the demand for their customers. They all want to be able to provide insurance, but then it's an illegal operation, so they're not quite sure exactly how to handle this. It's important to have insurance no matter what you're doing.
And the crew has arrived.
Yeah.
We're going to test the equipment.
But that's a good
We'll start
question. I mean, it would be
now.
a fight at that point. Short answer. Yep. Okay.
Can I ask a question? Where's
Yeah.
where's the little guy fall in this? And that being somebody wanting to get started in this world.
Yep.
And I guess my question falls kind of in the lines of how do we get started without spending $7,000 and doing it legally and properly and trying to follow all the rules that we can, with like a DJI Inspire 1 or something like that that's kind of off the shelf, but still wanting to follow the rules as best as we know how. Is there anything for that kind
and
of
you want to do
person?
this for as a business?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah, okay. Right now, you need a 333 exemption. I would study the other exemption petitions. I would file on your own. I would try to figure out, look for, they're very detailed and they're very, they're kind of complicated, but see if you can kind of put together your own exemption petition. And the key is putting together your own manual and doing all that at the front end and then submitting. And I think if you're doing aerial data collection,
Systems are in
get
place.
approved. That would be the idea. But
Presenters
I
ready.
wouldn't, especially if you're getting started right now, I would not be operating legally simply because if something happens, something goes wrong,
Okay.
Too much
you're
time.
done.
Ladies and gentlemen, our next
And then
presentation
I
is
guess
brought to you by
my main question with that would
Aerodata.
be
Thank you for being
kind
in
of
Aerial Robotics and
with only
Engineering this
128
morning.
accepted at this
Our
point.
sponsors are DJI.
Is it even possible?
Well, that
get an
number has
exception?
tripled in the last week or two. So
And our
once
next
this summer
demonstration is
grants
about
approval process is
aerojournalism
going to be, they're
presented
going
by
to
Aerodata.
Gotcha.
yeah.
And the turnaround